Jake Callahan lived alone, and that's exactly how he wanted it. His ranch rested on the edge of a wide Arizona canyon where the desert stretched endlessly and the wind spoke louder than people. Years ago, a fire had stolen everything from him, his wife, his son, even his smile. Since then, he built a life of silence and routine. The land didn't ask questions, and neither did the cattle. Every day was the same. Up at sunrise, feed the horses, check the fences, ride the land, fix whatever needed fixing. At night, he'd sit on the porch with a tin cup of strong coffee, watching the sun bleed into the desert sky. He avoided town unless supplies were low, and even then Jake kept his hat pulled low and his voice quieter than dust. But one August evening, something changed. Jake was riding along the south ridge of his land when he heard something unusual, a faint sound, almost too weak for human ears. At first, he thought it might be a wounded animal, but as he drew closer, he realized it was a voice, a woman's voice. He slowed his horse and followed the sound into the brush at the canyon's edge. There, under a twisted mesquite tree, lay a young woman. She was on her side, clutching her ankle. Her clothes were torn, her face scratched and dusty. Long black hair, tangled with dry leaves, framed her frightened eyes. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Jake dismounted slowly, lifting his hands to show he meant no harm. "You all right?" he asked, his voice rough from disuse. The woman didn't reply. She looked too weak to speak. Jake knelt beside her and offered his canteen. After a moment's hesitation, she took a sip, her lips trembling as the water touched them. "Can you walk?" Jake asked. She tried to move, but winced in pain. Her ankle was swollen badly. Jake didn't ask anything more. He gently lifted her in his arms, set her on his horse, and walked alongside, guiding them back toward his ranch. Inside the small cabin, he laid her on the worn-out couch and got to work. He wasn't a doctor, but years on the ranch had taught him how to clean wounds and treat sprains. He wrapped her ankle with cloth and applied an herbal salve he usually saved for his horses. She flinched at the sting, but remained silent. Jake set a plate of beans and bread near her, then stepped outside to give her space. For hours, she did not utter a word, but that night, as the desert cooled and the stars appeared, she finally spoke. Her voice was soft, accented, and cautious. "My name is Nia." Jake turned from the porch, surprised, but calm. "I'm Jake." She nodded, and silence returned. But something had shifted. There was now a thread between them, thin but real. Over the next few days, Nia began to heal. She remained mostly quiet, but Jake noticed the way her eyes studied everything. She was careful with his things, respectful of the space, and grateful in ways words could never show. She even began to cook meals using wild herbs she found nearby. Jake hadn't eaten this well in years, and each bite reminded him of something he thought he'd lost forever: comfort. Slowly, Jake learned more about her. Nia was Apache, from a village hidden deep inside the canyon. She didn't share much about her past, but Jake pieced together the truth. Strangers with rifles and cruel intentions had raided her people. She had been taken, but escaped under the cover of night. Days of wandering the desert left her broken until she collapsed onto Jake's land. Jake didn't press for more. He figured she would speak when she was ready, but inside, something in him had already shifted. Every time he looked at her, grinding herbs in a wooden bowl or stepping carefully onto the porch with her injured ankle, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: peace. One morning, while checking his land, Jake noticed something that froze him cold. Boot tracks. He crouched low, scanning the dirt. These weren't his. They were deep, heavy prints, not rancher boots, but the kind worn by gunmen, bounty hunters, or worse. His instinct sharpened instantly. That evening, while Nia was inside preparing a stew from mesquite pods and desert sage, Jake oiled his rifle and leaned it by the door. The next day, he saddled his horse and rode the boundary of his land. The signs were clearer now. Tracks led toward the canyon. Someone was searching. Maybe for her? When he returned, Nia sat quietly on the porch. Her eyes flicked toward the rifle, then toward the horizon. "You saw them?" she said softly. Jake nodded once. "They close?" he asked. She didn't answer directly. Her gaze drifted across the red rocks and open desert. "They will come," she whispered. "They always do." A chill ran down Jake's spine. He had lived through loss, fire, and death. But this was different. He wasn't just protecting his land anymore. He was protecting someone who mattered. That night, he did not sleep. Jake sat on the porch, eyes fixed on the desert. Every rustle of the wind made his hand twitch toward the rifle. At some point, Nia stepped out, a blanket draped around her shoulders. Without saying a word, she sat beside him, pulling the blanket over them both. Then she leaned slightly against his shoulder. For a man who had lived in silence for years, that small touch was louder than thunder. And in that moment, Jake Callahan admitted to himself what he'd been fighting to ignore. He was falling for her. But he also knew the desert never gave without taking. And he feared the price for saving Nia might be his very heart. The next morning came cold and heavy. The desert sun was slow to rise, as if even it feared what the day might bring. Jake Callahan stood at the edge of his porch, rifle loaded, horse saddled, eyes scanning the horizon. He hadn't slept a wink. Deep inside, he knew this was the day the men hunting Nia would come. Behind him, the door creaked open. Nia stepped out, wrapped in a faded blanket. Her ankle was still swollen, but her steps carried a quiet strength. Her dark eyes met his. She felt it too. "I can leave," she whispered. "If I go, they won't hurt you." Jake turned, his jaw tight. "This is my land," he said firmly. "If they come here, they answer to me." Nia's eyes filled with sorrow. "But I brought danger to your home." Jake's voice softened. "You brought life back to it?" For a moment, silence hung heavy between them, filled with the weight of unspoken feelings. Then Jake reached out and touched her hand, gently. "I already lost everything once. I'm not losing you, too." Just before noon, they arrived. 4 riders, dusty coats, wide-brimmed hats pulled low, guns at their sides. They rode slow, with a kind of confidence that came from being feared. Jake stood like a stone in front of his cabin as they approached. One of them, a tall man with a scar running down his cheek, nudged his horse forward. "You Callahan?" he asked. Jake gave a single nod. The man pulled out a folded paper. "We're looking for an Apache girl. Escaped from government transport. Supposed to be moved to a relocation camp. You seen her?" Jake's voice was calm, steady. "Ain't seen anyone." The scarred man squinted, studying him. "You sure about that?" Jake's eyes didn't flinch. "You're trespassing." The scarred man smirked, taking a slow step closer. "You really want to protect some runaway girl? She's government property. We're just doing our job." Jake didn't move. His voice dropped lower. "This land is mine. You step off it now." The silence was razor sharp. The other 3 shifted in their saddles, hands drifting toward their guns. And then a voice broke the tension. "She's not going anywhere." Nia stood in the doorway, small frame against the wind, her long dark hair whipping across her face, her eyes burning with defiance. The scarred man grinned. "There she is." Jake's body moved before thought. His rifle came up, barrel aimed straight. Boom! A single shot cracked the air. Dust exploded near the scarred man's boot. Jake hadn't missed. It was a warning. "Next one goes through your chest," Jake growled. The tension snapped like lightning. The other men dismounted fast, guns drawn, the desert air vibrating with the threat of violence. Jake didn't flinch. He stood firm, steady as a mountain, and then Nia stepped forward, limping but strong. "I'll go," she said, voice ringing with courage. "No more blood." Jake turned to her, stunned. "Number. You don't have to do this. I won't let them hurt you." Nia's eyes glistened. "I lived in fear too long. I won't let them break what I found here. Not you." She faced the scarred man. "If I come, you'll leave him alone." The scarred man smirked again. "Fine by me." He moved to grab her arm, but Jake's rifle lifted once more. His voice cut the air like a blade. "She's not going. She's under my protection. You want her, you'll have to go through me." The scarred man narrowed his eyes. "You ready to die for her?" Jake's answer came like thunder. "Number, I'm ready to kill for her." The desert itself seemed to go quiet. The other gunmen looked at one another, hesitation in their eyes. They weren't soldiers. They were mercenaries, paid to chase, not paid to die. Finally, the scarred man spat in the dirt. "Not worth it," he muttered. "Let's ride." And just like that, the four men turned their horses and rode off, their dust trailing behind them like a defeated storm. Jake didn't lower his rifle until they were gone. When he finally did, his hands were trembling. Beside him, Nia's face was wet with silent tears. She looked at Jake with something more powerful than gratitude, with love. That evening, the desert was quiet again. No gunshots, no horses, no danger, only the whisper of the wind over the canyon. Jake sat on the porch, his rifle leaning against the wall, his heartbeat finally slowing. Beside him, Nia sat with tears shining in her dark eyes. "No danger, no more running," she whispered, her voice trembling but strong. Her words cut straight through him. "I was ready to give up," she continued softly. "I never thought I'd feel safe again." Jake turned toward her, reaching out to gently take her hand. His voice was low, but steady. "You gave me something, too." Nia looked at him confused. "What?" Jake's eyes drifted to the horizon, painted in streaks of pink and orange. "A reason to feel alive again." Nia smiled through her tears and leaned her head against his shoulder. Jake wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. For the first time in years, the ranch didn't feel empty anymore. The silence was no longer heavy. It was peaceful. Weeks passed. Nia's ankle healed, and she stayed. She wasn't a guest anymore. She was part of the ranch. She planted desert herbs behind the cabin, taught Jake how to brew healing teas, how to read the stars, how to truly listen to the desert. In return, Jake taught her how to mend fences, ride horses, and shoot straight. They didn't speak of love, but it lived in every gesture, in the way Jake's eyes softened when he watched her, in the way Nia waited for him each evening on the porch. One quiet night, while watching the silver moon rise, Nia finally asked, "Do you ever wish things were different, that you hadn't lost what you had before?" Jake stayed silent for a long moment. The desert wind carried the weight of his answer. "No," he said at last, "because If I hadn't lost it, I wouldn't have found you." Nia's eyes glistened as she smiled, and in that moment they both knew their scars had brought them together. In time, the nearby town learned of the Apache woman living with the quiet cowboy. Some whispered, some offered suspicious glances, but none dared challenge Jake Callahan, not after what he had done, and those who visited the ranch could see the truth for themselves. Jake smiled now, sometimes even laughed, and Nia, she looked like she belonged to the land. Together they built a life, not perfect, not easy, but theirs. Years later, their tale became a local legend. Some said she had saved his broken soul. Others said he had given her freedom. But Jake and Nia never cared what people said. They simply lived, loved, and watched the desert bloom around them.